It is now 20 years since the 2000s trilogy of Spider-Man movies took the world by storm. When Sam Raimi's first film hit cinemas in 2002, it grossed over $800 million worldwide, turned Tobey Maguire into a star, and earned its place in the hearts of millennial children everywhere.
If you want the shots, I'll take the staff job. Double the money.
Its sequel in 2004 was a similar success and is widely considered one of the best comic book movies ever made. Its third film in 2007 is often misremembered as a box office flop, but it too was a reasonable success and has lots of merit despite being seen as more polarizing than the first two. And if I may be biased, I'm still sad we didn't get the planned fourth film in 2011. It was rebooted in 2012, first with The Amazing Spider-Man, now having Andrew Garfield in the title role.
Serious? Who are you? No one seems to grasp the concept of the mask.
After only 2 movies, and the character was then reacquired by Marvel Films and introduced to the MCU in 2016, now played by Tom Holland and getting another trilogy.
Hey everyone.
The last of which saw them introducing a multiverse gimmick to allow all 3 cinematic Spider-Men the chance to interact on the screen and offer something as a resolution to Tobey and Andrew's stories.
I'm lame. I can take it. No, I can take it.
You are amazing.
And of course, there are endless debates about which Spider-Man is best, referring both to the actor, the incarnation of the character, and the films themselves. As you can guess by the title of this video, I'm an OG trilogy boy.
I like you a lot.
So, why do the Sam Raimi films work so well and still hold up to this day? First, we have to remind ourselves that what a comic book movie resembled to the public in 2002 was not what we'd think of today. While the 80s and early 90s had seen some extremely well-received films based on Superman and Batman, it was those franchises that kind of ruined it for everyone else. They both had 2 extremely popular entries starting the franchise off, but their third films took things in a goofier direction, and their fourth ones being remembered as unintentional comedies, with reputations of being so bad it's good that continue today. So, in the eyes of the general public, comic book superhero movies were mindless crap created to sell toys that only extremely dumb children would enjoy. There was the other option, popularized by the unexpected success of the Blade films, to make things much darker and grittier, prioritizing seriousness to draw in mature audiences. The X-Men films followed this approach, by taking a series of characters known for their bold and colourful costumes in the comics and putting them in all black, while also emphasizing themes of persecution, which worked in the film's favour. A Spider-Man movie had been in development since the 80s, but was set back by the aforementioned failure of Superman 3, and the other aforementioned flop sequels meant that the adaptation's budget was constantly lowering, and it was considered dead once Batman and Robin came out. But remember Blade and X-Men? Their twin successors convinced studios that movies based on Marvel characters could be successful. It bounced from director to director, including Tim Burton, who had brought the first 2 Batman movies to the screen. But few had the passion for the character and the story that would really do it justice. In comes Sam Raimi. He had been a fan of the Spider-Man comic ever since he was a child, and his passion for the property convinced Sony to give him the job. Wanting to deviate from traditionally handsome actors like Christopher Reeve and focus on the heart and soul, he chose Tobey Maguire based on his work in the Cider House Rules. And although his physique made the higher-ups skeptical, he quickly won them over with a really good audition. It was extremely important that this Spider-Man not be dark and brooding, like Blade, Batman, or Wolverine, because that isn't the character. Peter Parker at his heart is the champion of the underdogs. He's not the best looking guy at school, he comes from poverty, he's lean rather than jacked and brainy rather than brawny. And although he starts off having a chip on his shoulder and becoming a bit of a bully once he got his powers, he soon learned the value of responsibility and kindness. Despite the sadness Peter experiences in never knowing his parents, Uncle Ben getting killed because of him, and the death of Gwen Stacy, Spider-Man is a very idealistic superhero. In fact, Stan Lee put him in a mask in the first place so that a reader of any background could be able to imagine themselves in the role. This version of Peter Parker draws a lot from Clark Kent, but Sam Raimi knew how to make this character work on screen. For an audience that still had Batman and Robin in their minds, in order to accept the idealism of this version, Peter would have to be transparently sincere. The movie had to be fun without being ridiculous. It had to be emotional without being bleak. And it had to be optimistic without being corny. And if it was, it had to be in a way that the audience went along with it. Notably, this scene.
You mess with Spidey, you mess with New York. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us.
Was put in as a tribute to the solidarity New Yorkers showed after the 9/11 tragedy. The Raimi trilogy is also distinct from the other 2, which were more obviously set in the present day, whereas this one goes for a more timeless feel. It may have been made in 2002, but it doesn't feel like it's set there. And it's pretty fitting since Spider-Man as a comic started in the 60s and would have meant something different to each generation of kids by the time it hit the big screen. So this feels like a nod to that. And Peter has this quintessential superhero origin story. Bullied kid and social nobody, yet still has a good heart, bitten by a radioactive spider and getting superpowers. First using them to get even with people and show off, but then getting a major reality check after the loss of his uncle, and ultimately learning to use his powers to help people. It's simple, but it works. Tobey Maguire may have a lot of means making fun of his performance, but he brings an earnestness to the role that this film definitely needed to succeed as well as it did. He plays the nerdy everyman to perfection at the beginning, and transitions nicely across the whole trilogy, becoming an uncertain yet determined hero in 1. A man resentful of what being a hero costs him, but still an optimist who will do the right thing in 2, and a fallen hero grappling with his darker side in 3. And while the memes are fun, I feel like there's an unfortunate side effect of stripping all these individual moments and scenes out of their broader context in a way that doesn't happen to the other 2 Spider-Men, even though their films and characterizations have their flaws as well. And of course, Peter's arc in Spider-Man 2 of having to juggle 2 jobs, university, personal relationships, and saving the day, which has to take priority over everything else, is depressingly relatable to everyone today having to break their backs just to make ends meet. This Spider-Man isn't at the center of some big conspiracy and doesn't have the backing of a billionaire with unlimited gadgets. He's just an ordinary guy trying to survive. And really, the emotional core of these 3 films is how Peter, Harry, and Mary Jane are all trying to make sense of the world and where they fit into it. MJ especially gets a lot of criticism. First from comic purists, who aren't wild about her being presented as Peter's lifelong love interest and taking on the canonical role of Gwen Stacy, which some might argue misses the point of what MJ meant to Peter in the comics. Second, from people who go so far as to claim she was the real villain of the trilogy for such heinous acts like getting kidnapped by every villain, being understandably mad that Peter didn't show up to her play without an explanation, and leaving her fiancé at the altar, which admittedly is very hard to defend. But if you look at the arc across all 3 films, and take the trilogy as one big coming-of-age story, you see Mary Jane's first struggle with being seen as an object by all men around her, searching for someone who will love her as a person, and trying to pull herself out of poverty while also pursuing her dreams. And that gives her and Peter almost the same complete arc, where they both have to deal with what obstacles life throws in their direction, and grow from the experiences to build a better future for themselves. And although they get their classic happily ever after at the end of Spider-Man 2, the 3rd film shows them having to try and build a relationship on uncertain terms, even with the biggest obstacle of Peter trying to hide his identity solved. Their final scene is pretty beautiful in its simplicity. No spectacular kiss or dramatic declaration of love, just Mary Jane taking Peter's hand and them sharing a dance, letting the audience know that they'll try their best, which is what this trilogy is all about. Even the villains have really strong thematic relevance to the story. Unlike most of the ones in the MCU, where you can pick out maybe 5 who were actually well written and entertaining at the same time, all of them represent what happens when a regular person on hard times gets superpowers. Norman Osborn, as his research is about to amount to nothing, Doc Ock after his true love is killed and his reputation destroyed, Sam when his daughter is terminally ill, and Eddie Brock after getting fired and dumped. All of them contrast to Peter by not taking responsibility and using their powers for good, instead using them for selfish reasons. It's simple, but that's not a bad thing. And because Spider-Man was always idealistic, each villain is portrayed with their own brand of tragedy in a way that doesn't feel repetitive. Doc Ock having to destroy his life's work and die knowing he'll be remembered as a monster, Eddie Brock choosing to die with the symbiote in a vain attempt to feel whole again, Sandman knowing he's lost everything and can only hope for the tiniest bit of closure, and Norman's
Peter, don't tell Harry.
And let's talk about Harry. Compare how The Amazing Spider-Man 2 introduced him out of nowhere and tried to build him and Peter as lifelong friends when he wasn't even in the first film, and then rushed his Green Goblin origin. This trilogy, however, carefully built to that over 3 films, letting Harry slowly develop in that direction and giving it the emotional weight it needed. It means something when Harry discovers that Peter is Spider-Man, because we'd spent a whole film seeing his resentment over the death of his father, and likewise with the collapse of their friendship. But in keeping with the idealism of the trilogy and the property, its villains all get a chance at redemption. Not necessarily to continue with their lives without consequences, but to at least do the right thing in their final moments. In fact, Doc Ock going out making a heroic sacrifice foreshadows that Harry can do the same in the climax of the 3rd film, and Harry's whole character is driven by a desire to prove himself to his father, and in the climax of Spider-Man 3, he finally demonstrates that he's a better man. Norman got killed by his own glider trying to kill Peter, while Harry got killed by it trying to save him. This final scene between the 3 of them carries so much emotional weight, and it never fails to give me goosebumps every time I watch it. No other scene in anything has ever made me feel like that, ever. As I mentioned at the beginning, this was not planned as a trilogy, and a 4th film was in the works, but Sam Raimi was disillusioned after how Spider-Man 3 turned out, since he'd been forced to put Venom in there by the studio execs, and Bryce Dallas Howard's pregnancy meant MJ being kidnapped in the 3rd act yet again instead of Gwen, when Kirsten Dunst had agreed to come back on the condition she'd not played the damsel in distress again, and he admitted that breaking the news to her was one of the hardest things he'd ever done in the business. He ended up dropping out of the 4th film, worried about it turning out the same way and getting a similar critical thrashing, and wouldn't return to making a superhero movies until Multiverse of Madness over a decade later. But time heals all wounds, and growing nostalgia for the original trilogy has led to rumours of a potential 4th film after all. No doubt helped by several key players starring in No Way Home. And honestly, great if that's the case. But if it isn't, I still love this trilogy, and even though it is beloved and nostalgic, I'd like to see it get more respect for just what an impact it had, and still does to this day. When it first came out, superhero movies were an uncertain genre, and now we're spoiled for choice. And while he wasn't the first hero to headline a smash hit, it's fair to say that Tobey's Spider-Man swung so Tom's could fly. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're 3 away from 900 and are aiming for 1000, and leave a comment on who's your favourite Spider-Man and why. Thank you for watching.